The Jefferson County Courthouse stood still under the weight of sunlight filtering through towering windows, casting long streaks of gold across polished marble floors and heavy oak benches that bore witness to 1,000 stories, but none quite like the one that was about to unfold, a story of war, betrayal, justice, and redemption. On that morning, Judge Richard Hamilton sat high on his bench, robed in authority and armed with skepticism, looking down on the man before him with a cold smirk, unaware that within minutes the very foundations of his belief would be shaken, not by argument, but by the undeniable presence of those who understood what it meant to bleed for a flag. The defendant, Michael Winters, stood stiffly, his shoulders hunched, not from shame, but from the weight of years spent carrying burdens most could never comprehend. He was 42 years old, a veteran of 3 deployments to Afghanistan, a man with a Purple Heart in a drawer he never opened and nightmares he never escaped. The war had left him with shrapnel in his leg, but it was the invisible scars that had brought him here today. He wasn't charged with violence or theft, but for trespassing and disturbing the peace after he stood outside the home of a politician who had promised, on camera and in front of voters, to support legislation that would have funded PTSD treatment centers in counties like his, and then betrayed that promise by voting against it when it mattered most. Winters hadn't thrown a brick, hadn't yelled or threatened, hadn't carried anything more dangerous than a sign that read, "Keep your promise. Veterans are dying." And yet, there he was, being prosecuted like a criminal in front of a man whose disdain for veterans was an open secret, a judge who had never served, who had once pulled strings to avoid the draft, and whose courtroom was notorious for harsh sentences and cold rulings. Michael's public defender, Sarah Chin, barely 2 years out of law school, stood beside him nervously flipping through papers, knowing full well that the law was not always justice, and that this courtroom had little patience for compassion. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady despite the tension in the room, "my client pleads not guilty." Sergeant First Class Michael Winters is a decorated veteran, a man whose actions were driven not by malice, but by desperation. A plea for help on behalf of countless others suffering silently. Judge Hamilton raised an eyebrow and scoffed. "This court does not reward melodrama, Miss Chin. Your client broke the law." Sarah tried again. "We request leniency in light of Mr. Winters' service and his current mental health diagnosis of severe PTSD. His protest was peaceful." "Everyone's got problems," the judge interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "We don't get to break laws because we feel sad." A murmur rolled through the courtroom as Michael, silent until now, lifted his gaze and said softly, "Your Honor, I only wanted to look the man in the eye and ask him why. Why he promised us help and then turned his back." His voice cracked. 22 veterans take their lives every day in this country. I've buried 4 from my own unit. I wasn't protesting for myself. I was speaking for the dead. There was a silence so heavy, it felt like thunder was waiting just outside the courthouse doors. Then Judge Hamilton laughed. Not loudly, but enough to slice through Michael's dignity like a razor. "Save it for Veterans Day parades, Mr. Winters. This is a courtroom, not a therapy circle." Gasps echoed through the benches. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Michael lowered his head, not from guilt, but from something worse, humiliation. Sarah gritted her teeth. "Your Honor, I would like to call a character witness." "Fine," the judge snapped. 5 minutes. Sarah rushed to the back, opened the doors, and whispered something to a figure waiting outside. "The defense calls Colonel James Harrington." The name sent a ripple through the room. The doors burst open, and in strode a tall, broad-shouldered man in full military dress uniform, medals gleaming against his chest, a man with a steel gaze and a steel leg, the latter clearly visible beneath his formal trousers. The entire courtroom turned, jaws slack, as the colonel made his way to the witness stand. Even Judge Hamilton's smug composure cracked. Harrington took the oath, and when he spoke, his voice rolled through the chamber with the unshakable authority of someone who had led men through fire. Sergeant Winters served under my command. In 2016, our convoy was ambushed. 3 men died instantly. I was pinned in a burning vehicle. Winters ran through enemy fire, injured, to pull me out seconds before it exploded. He then carried me, bleeding and unconscious, half a mile to extraction. That's why I'm alive today. The silence was absolute. He suffers. Yes, Harrington continued, but he suffers because he chose to live. And he chose to live so that men like me could keep breathing. What he did outside that politician's house was not a crime. It was a duty. The judge shifted in his seat. Impressive service, Colonel, but hardly relevant to the legality of his actions. Harrington's tone darkened. He has done more for this community than any person in this room, including that politician. He started a peer support group with his own disability pay. He's helped dozens transition back to civilian life. When the VA office was understaffed last winter, he volunteered 40 hours a week while working night shifts as a security guard just to pay rent. A woman stood in the back. That's true. I work at the VA. He cut our backlog by 3 months. Sit down, the judge barked, pounding the gavel. But the momentum had shifted. Dozens of veterans entered through the doors, some walking, some in wheelchairs, some missing limbs, all wearing black shirts with white letters that read, "Veterans Stand Together." "Remove them," Hamilton ordered. The bailiff hesitated. Sarah stood. "They have every right to be here, Your Honor. This is a public court." Before Hamilton could respond, another figure entered, an old man in a wheelchair pushed by his daughter. He wore a WTOIB veteran cap pinned with medals. Even Colonel Harrington stood at attention. "Who is that?" the judge asked, voice rising. The clerk whispered something, and the color drained from Hamilton's face. "Your Honor," the woman said, "my father, Major General Robert Hamilton, requested to attend this hearing." A collective gasp filled the room. The judge's own father, a war hero, had come. "Father, this is highly irregular." "Richard," the old man's voice trembled, but cut through the room like a sword. "I raised you better than this." The judge went silent. "When I fought in Normandy, I fought for a country that honors its soldiers, not one that mocks them in court." His gaze never wavered. "This young man," he gestured to Michael, "showed more loyalty to his country and his brothers than I have seen in your courtroom all year. You should be ashamed." Judge Hamilton deflated before the eyes of the people he once ruled. Harrington stepped forward again. "We're not asking for a dismissal. We're asking for context, for justice with understanding, for a decision worthy of this man's sacrifice." The judge called a recess. When he returned, he looked different. Less judge, more man. "Mr. Winters," he said quietly, "why did you go to the senator's house?" Michael stood. "Because I made a promise to my friends who died in combat that I would look out for the ones who made it home. I told them help was coming. When that bill failed, I felt like I failed them. I just wanted an answer, that's all." "And your sign?" the judge asked. It read, "Keep your promise. Veterans are dying." A long pause. Then Hamilton said, "This court finds you guilty of trespassing. However, considering the circumstances and your service, I sentence you to 6 months of probation and 100 hours of community service, fulfilled through expanding your Veterans Support Group, which this court now recognizes as an official community program. The courtroom erupted in applause. Hamilton didn't stop it. Furthermore, he added, this court donates $10,000 to your organization and strongly urges Senator Davis to meet with Mr. Winters and other veteran representatives to address the urgent need for PTSD treatment. As reporters rushed to publish headlines, as veterans wiped tears from their eyes, Michael Winters stood in disbelief. A judge who once laughed at his tears had just handed him the foundation for something larger. Over the following weeks, the story spread nationwide. Senator Davis, under pressure, reintroduced the bill, this time with expanded funding. Construction began on the Jefferson County Veteran PTSD Center, with Michael and Colonel Harrington cutting the ribbon together. The judge who once mocked him became one of his strongest allies, founding one of the state's first veteran treatment courts, speaking at law schools, consulting Michael on veteran reintegration issues, and regularly attending group meetings at the center. Sarah Chin, the public defender who once stood alone, now led a legal outreach program for veterans. The $10,000 donation became $100,000 through community contributions, allowing the center to grow, hire professional counselors, and run 24/7 crisis lines. Michael kept volunteering, monitoring that line even late into the night. 1 year later, standing before hundreds at the grand opening, Michael said, "When I came home from war, I thought I'd left the best parts of me behind. But this center proves that healing is possible, not just for individuals, but for communities." In the front row sat Judge Hamilton, beside his frail but proud father. And when the event ended, the judge approached him. "You taught me that real courage isn't being fearless. It's doing the right thing even when you are afraid." Michael shook his hand. "And you taught me that people can change. Sometimes they just need the right person to walk through the door." That night, sitting alone outside the center, Michael's phone buzzed, a crisis call from a fellow veteran. Without hesitation, he answered. "You're not alone, brother," he said calmly. "Believe me, things can change in ways you never expected." And as his voice steadied a stranger on the other end, Michael realized he no longer trembled when he spoke those words. He believed them now, not just for others, but for himself. Because in standing tall in the courtroom that day, he hadn't just changed a verdict. He'd changed the world around him and maybe, just maybe, helped others find the strength to do the same.